Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're so excited to have for today's workshop, Car Buying with Jackie Russell from Bank of California. And today we're going to be learning a couple of things. I just want to break down just a little introduction. What should you expect for today's workshop? So it's going to be learning about research and investigating secured and unsecured installment loans, calculating how much you can afford, how much car can you afford, evaluate long-term costs associated with buying a car, including insurance and maintenance, the difference between leasing and purchasing. Funny thing is, I'm actually like right in the middle of selling my car, and I'm gonna be buying a car. So this is gonna be a workshop for myself too. So I'm excited to hear to see what Jackie has all this great information in the workshop that she's gonna be giving to us today. So without further ado, I just want to introduce Jackie Russell from Bank of California. I don't know if Jackie, you want to introduce yourself real fast, kind of share a little bit of what you do at the bank, and then you can go ahead and start with your presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Absolutely. Hi, my name's Jackie Russell, and I'm a Senior Director Relationship Manager at Bank of California. Today, we're going to be talking, about buying a car and the different types of loans that are available to you when doing so. But normally, my job at Bank of California, as I actually manage deposits for some of our specialized clients, like property managers and class action administrators. But I can definitely share some information about car buying as well. So, Josh or
Awesome.
Rima?
Thank you. Thank you so much for introducing yourself and letting
No
us know a
problem.
little bit about what you do at the bank. And without further ado, you can go ahead and start with your presentation, and I'll definitely be listening because, like I said, I'm selling my car and I'm going to be buying a car soon. So maybe I can
No
learn a
problem.
couple of things today.
Okay, thanks, Rima. Okay, so today's objectives are about researching and identifying installment loans. And we'll be going through in just a few minutes on, what exactly an installment loan is. Calculating what you can afford, because there could be a lot of different factors depending on, which path you take to buy a car. Evaluate long-term costs and the difference between leasing and purchasing. Okay, well, this is always a nice thing, reality check about what you want versus what you can afford. I'm sure everybody on the call has, their dream car in mind, but I think as we kind of go through this presentation, it's really important to kind of take into account, what you can realistically afford because, similarly to a house, a car, just because you buy it doesn't mean it stops costing you money at that point either. So we always want to be realistic about what you actually want and what you can afford and what you actually need. So during my next slide. Okay, so these are some of the things you want to think about in terms of the true cost of a car. You want to think about what you can afford right now, in 2 years, in 5 years. Do you actually need a car or do you want one? How much money do you need for the down payment and what amount can you pay each month? Both of those pieces will kind of affect one another because, unless you're paying for this vehicle all in cash, you would usually put down some percentage as the down payment and then make payments on the car monthly after that. Taking into account how much gas would cost, the fact that if you own a car, you absolutely need to have insurance legally. This question says, will I need money for repairs? Most likely, yes. So you always want to kind of take into account, how much money you also need to be able to put aside if anything should happen to the car. And then lastly, the question of whether or not leasing is a better option for you versus car ownership. So Dorima, you can go to the next slide. Yeah. Okay, so these are a few of the options in paying for your car. You can either pay cash in full, you could lease a car, or you could take out an installment loan, which is money you borrow and then repay. An installment loan would be the same type of a loan as if you were going to buy a house. So, you take out a loan for whatever amount that you didn't put down. So, let's say your car costs $10,000 and you want to put, 10% down. So that would be your down payment of $1,000, and then your loan would be on the $9,000. and that would be paid over a period of time, usually both with cars and homes. It's definitely several years, but that's again something that you could probably work out either with the bank or at the car dealership. So next slide. Okay, there's two types of installment loans. One would be secured, which means you offer collateral. In this case, the collateral would have been like the $1,000 that you would put down for the loan. And if it's not paid back, or you would be putting, actually, sorry. And with the secured loan, your collateral for the loan, in this case, would be like the automobile. So you're getting a loan and the collateral that you have up against it is the car. That means that if it's not paid back, right, on the monthly basis that you've agreed upon, that car can then be taken back from you. So that's the installment loan. An unsecured loan would be something that isn't secured by any type of collateral. So like with a home, the collateral for the secured loan is the home. With a car, the collateral is the car. But if you have an unsecured loan, the examples would be like student loan debt or even just getting a credit card, because you're not offering anything up in that situation in order to get that credit. So these are all examples of collateral, obviously. A lot of these aren't going to really apply in terms of getting a car loan or anything like that. But in terms of just getting loans, if you want to go back, you can. I'll just kind of explain something. But if you want to kind of have an understanding of the different types of loans people can get and what type of collateral they can offer up, inventory is something that businesses would offer up in order to get a loan. They'll offer that up as collateral. Machinery and equipment. Other businesses would use their invoices as collateral, like the things that they have, sales in order to get a loan. But in this case, and in the real estate example, when you get a home loan, you would use your home as the collateral, and same with the automobile. If you're going to buy a car, that car is then the collateral. And it's just important to always remember that, because if you use that vehicle as collateral in order to get your loan, you always have to remember that if you don't make those payments, that car will be taken back from you in order to appease the loan. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so these are the examples of installment loans. So again, this would be the type of loan you would be getting if you chose not to pay for your car in cash. And I just want to kind of give one example about why you might want to use an installment loan or just a car loan to get a car, even if you have all the cash you need to buy it. So the first car that I bought, I had saved up enough money in cash to purchase the car that I wanted. But when I got to the dealership and everything like that, it became apparent to me that it might be smarter to actually take a loan out on the car and only put down a down payment, and then I would be able to still hold on to the rest of the cash that I had. The reasoning for this is that car loans are a really, really, really good opportunity for people to establish credit. And so, first you establish credit by having a credit card, and hopefully you handle that responsibly. You pay down your balance every month, and then, you show that you can responsibly handle credit. The next step in building credit would be something like an installment loan for a car. And why that's important is because if that's your first big purchase, hopefully the dream would be that you at some point are able to go ahead and buy a home. But in order to buy a home, you really have to have some credit history there. So even if you do have all the money to buy the vehicle that you want to buy, it is always good to kind of take a look about what the APR rates are for the car, because sometimes if you're buying a new car, I'm just using my example, the car dealership was offering me like a 1% loan, which is not like, that's a very, very good rate. You wouldn't get that at a bank today, but that's what they were offering because they were the car dealership and they were helping me finance it. So that allowed me to hold on to the rest of the money that I was going to use to buy this car all in cash, which then allowed me to put some away so that if I needed to make repairs or anything or pay for insurance, anything like that, I did have some extra money on hand. And sure, I had a loan, but as long as I continued to pay it responsibly every month per the agreement, per the loan agreement, it also allowed me to establish a credit history and build more credit. So that is something I just think is important to consider when you are purchasing your first car, if you're choosing to purchase, it's not always, it sounds sort of contradictory, but it isn't always the best idea to pay all out in cash if you know that like you can responsibly make those monthly payments. There is some benefit to getting loans sometimes because you need to be able to build credit, for purchases, for future purchases, like hopefully a home. So going into installment loans, loans are usually going to have, some type of interest rate associated with them. So the APR is the cost of borrowing this money on a yearly basis. It reflects both the interest you are charged and any fees, and it's the most important tool in comparing loans. The reason this is specifically called out is because it's like that's the rate that whenever you look at even credit card bills or anything like that, that's what that APR means. Fixed rate loans are loans where the interest rate stays the same throughout the entire period. So for example, like a mortgage loan, usually most often you get a fixed rate loan, because with that kind of purchase, you need to know exactly like what that payment is going to be on a monthly basis. And that's just like the most commonly found rate for a mortgage. The next thing is called a variable rate loan. This means that the interest rate could change during the loan period. I don't think that that's super applicable to anybody here, because a lot of times variable rate loans would really be more like business loans. And the rate varies because it's being calculated on some larger rate. And if anybody has any questions about that, you can certainly ask me, but it does get a little bit more detailed. But just like the Federal Reserve has rates, there's another group that comes up with something called the LIBOR rate, and that's how most business loans are calculated out. So I don't think variable rate loans would necessarily apply to anybody on the phone here, but it is good to note that make sure you know what kind of a loan you are getting, because with a fixed rate loan, you'll know on a monthly basis what your rate is and how much interest you're paying on whatever that loan is. A variable loan is something I just wouldn't really recommend anybody getting involved in, and make sure you never sign up for something like that, because you don't have any kind of control over where that rate goes. And so that could be a little bit scary, if rates go up at some point and then you suddenly can't, afford that home or vehicle anymore. So with installment loans, let me see what the next slide is, because I have some notes. Okay, so I'll just say this: with installment loans, they're repaid regularly scheduled payments or installments. So an installment would be your monthly payment each month. With an installment loan, you pay principal and interest. And like I said, the advantage here of doing that is, you're building credit, and you usually can compare quite a few different loans. And so they usually have more flexibility is a big thing here, where you can, compare rates, and they're often more low rates. The only disadvantage that I think I pointed out a few times here is that if you do default, you lose your collateral. So for example, if you get the installment loan for the car and you suddenly stop making all your payments, that's considered a default, and it would mean a loss of your collateral, which would be the vehicle in this case. So here's a quick, so you know what, before I continue, Dorima or Josh, does anybody have any questions? I know I moved through quite a bit pretty quickly, so I figured I'll take a break.
It looks like there's one question. Someone asked, let's see what it was here. Should we would you suggest that if the car dealership offers a better rate, something like the one that you said, basically like under 3%, should we put a smaller down payment and save the remainder for repairs and future car related costs?
Good question. I think it's always got to be a cost benefit analysis. Like this, for example, this calculation right now is taking into account, what the cost of a car is really. And so, you've got to kind of do some calculations on your own before you even try to figure out. I mean, everybody has an idea of what their dream car is and everything like that, but I would really take into calculation what you feel like you could pay on a monthly basis for a car. If you've saved up, a big chunk of money, and then you find out that there is some really good interest rate that dealership's offering you if you do a loan with them versus just paying outright cash, I think it's important to take a few minutes and figure out what that cost is. Because obviously if you buy, a $10,000 car and you only put 10% down, that's $1,000. You're going to be paying more interest at the end of the day because you have a lot more principal to pay down, which would be like the 9,000. So it's going to take you probably a lot more time. It just means more interest over time, which may not be an issue for you. But I would always advise to put down as much as you can, because it's just always safer, in my opinion, obviously, to have a more comfortable car payment. But I mean, the whole thing just allows you to sort of have flexibility about what makes the most sense for yourself. So in my opinion, I would always put as much down as you possibly could. My main point there was just that if you find out that you can get a loan and you can kind of keep some of that money aside for these types of things, because obviously, you're going to have to register your car, get insurance. There could be all sorts of costs that come up. That sometimes that might be the more practical option.
Makes
But that's why
sense.
you kind of want to do the math on it and figure out, like, you don't want to also over leverage yourself where you have some giant payment you're making monthly, you know what I mean? Because as much as we all try to just put some of that money away for the future, if it's there, you may spend it too. So I would definitely always put as much down as you can, but just keep in mind that sometime a loan is a good option, even if you do have all the cash, just for the reasons that I provided. Building credit's a very important one.
Okay, great. And one other question,
Mhm.
and related to the purchasing of a car, someone asked, is it smart to get approved, pre-approved, like at a credit union or bank before going to the dealer, before even like shopping around for cars? And why
Yeah,
would
no,
that
I
be
think it's
good?
always smart to get pre-approved, or at least because it also allows you to do your research. I mean, I think when you start looking at these types of larger purchases, it is really hard, even for myself, before I, talk to a bank about different things, to find out how much, I could really legitimately afford. Where are interest rates at? Is, going to a credit union, finding out like what they could offer you is important, and then comparing it with a bank. And then, the difference is sometimes the car dealerships themselves will finance loans. And because they don't want you to necessarily pay all in cash, they'll also have a different interest rate. So I definitely think it's a very good idea to get pre-approved. I mean, who knows? The hope is that you've saved up as much money as you can to put as much down on the car, if that's what you're choosing to do, is buy it. But if you already know you don't have enough money to buy the car that, remember, you need to buy, not necessarily that you want to buy, then getting pre-approved is definitely important to even have enough money to, purchase that car, given that you don't have it all in cash at that time. So always do as much research as you can in going to different establishments, whether it's a credit union, a bank, whomever, and find out the details around the loan that you could get approved for and what that would look like on a monthly basis.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I think that answers both those questions. If anything
Okay.
comes up, I'll let you know. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so if we're looking at this calculation, this is sort of what I was saying earlier about if you, if you're going to the total cost of the car, and like what you're putting down, and versus like what you're actually borrowing. So let's say, for example, like, if this breaks it down a little bit funny, but so if your down payment is $2,500, that means the total cost of the car, just like if you were at the dealership, is, what is it, $16,000. But if so, the car is 16,000, and you've decided, hey, I'm able to put down $2,500. That means you're financing or taking out a loan for the 13,500. And here they're using 60, the number of payments as a 60, which would be 5 years. And that's pretty standard probably for a car. Mortgages are like anywhere from 15 to 30 years, which obviously it's a much larger purchase, but 5 years makes sense for how much you would pay for a car. So if you're financing the 1350, right, that's 60 payments of $225. Now, one thing it isn't taking into account here is just that your loan, obviously that monthly payment, there's going to be a percentage of interest on that as well. So the 225, that's not even calculating out your interest. So that's why you do want to speak with somebody before you go do this stuff to find out, like, what am I really truly looking for on a monthly basis. And then this last part is the $575. I think it's just, again, giving another example of the fact that, like, it doesn't end with just, the price tag necessarily on the car. There's always going to be taxes, registration, gas, insurance, and let's hope that, like, you have a good driving record, because if you get in an accident at some point while you're driving, or, you're at fault for something, that also affects your cost of insurance. And so, I mean, that can really go up and up and up as well. So you really want to take into account all the costs of a car. Okay, so where to get a loan? Thanks. Well, here, I'll let them all go up. Okay. Okay, so like I was mentioning, you could go get it at a bank, but you may also be familiar with credit unions as well. There's finance companies, and then, like I said, car dealerships themselves will be able to offer you loans as well. So it's important to kind of do some research and see, where you think you can get, or, who's offering the best rate with the best terms. How long is the loan for? Is it only 5 years? Is it 10 years? What's the interest rate that's associated with it? How some of them will maybe require you, one loan might require you to put down more than another, because honestly, usually the more you put down, the lower your interest rate goes, because you have more skin in the game, per se, right? You've actually said, hey, I'm not just making these monthly payments. I've actually put, $5,000 into this car of my money. That pretty much means you have more to lose, because let's say you miss one of those payments, then you've lost that $5,000 and the car at that point. That's all your collateral. So the benefit of putting more down is that you can usually, argue for a better rate at that point. Okay, next slide. Okay, so leasing versus buying. And why you might want to do one or the other. I think there's a variety of different reasons for why somebody would lease versus why they would buy. Leasing could be a good idea if you're not necessarily sure of the car that you want right now. And so rather than committing to buying that car, you'd rather lease it. So it's kind of like, a longer term rental, right? The difference is that when you lease a car, it's like, like renting an apartment versus buying a house. You don't own that car, right? And so you're paying somebody else money all the time, where you're not really reaping any benefit besides getting to drive that car on a monthly basis. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. I mean, everybody has to rent before they own, especially in homes and things like that. But it's just, that is the main difference. The one thing I would just, I've had friends that instead of buying a car, they decided to lease it. And they did that because they wanted to lease, like a Mercedes Benz or something like that. I would just really caution everybody from deciding to lease so that you can get some fancier car versus buying. Because at the end of the day, when you buy that car, once you pay that off, it belongs to you. When you lease a car, you're making payments to somebody that isn't yourself. At least when you're like buying a car, if you've got a loan, like that car becomes yours at some point in time. I don't want to say leasing is like throwing money away necessarily, because it definitely makes sense in a lot of different scenarios. And maybe, you aren't ready to buy yet, but you want to lease. But just do keep in mind that I would never advise anybody to choose not to buy a car because you'd rather lease the more expensive one that you couldn't afford to buy. I just don't see any reason in that. But, I also have never bought, what quote unquote would be my dream car, because my thought is that I'd like to save as much money as I can, to make that bigger purchase, which is buying a home. Another couple of things that you have to realize with leasing versus buying is that with wear and tear, when you lease a car, any scratch, any damage to the car, anything at all, you're responsible for that. You have to fix it. When you buy, there aren't any additional costs unless you choose to do it. So, I have a scratch in the side of my car. I haven't necessarily fixed it. I'm not saying that that's a totally positive thing. But the difference is that I'm not beholden to fix it. You know, it's at my choice. If you lease a car, I mean, it's not your car. It's like renting a car, right? So like you're going to be charged for that damage, no matter what. And so that could also turn out to be some unforeseen costs that you have. The other thing to keep in mind is with leasing versus buying, you have lower payments maybe with leasing than you would if you were going to buy that same car. But with buying, you know, obviously you have higher payments and interest because the car does become yours. Just because when you are leasing, I mean, sure, they're lower payments, but again, it's money that you're never going to get back. When you buy the car, at some point you have the opportunity to sell that car, and then, you know, you'll have all that money that you've already put into it. So that's the big difference there. I'll give it a second. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions on this, because this is definitely a huge consideration, I think, when choosing to purchase a car.
Yeah, it looks like someone asked in regards to
Mhm.
leasing and buying a car. A younger person, it looks like they said that they're about to graduate college, and they said, instead of buying the car, would leasing be good if I don't want to deal with like any mechanical stuff? Do you know if like they're basically asking if it covers all of that? Like if let's say the car breaks down, would that be covered, or is it
Yes.
better?
So yeah, that is definitely a better option. I would just make sure that you also just read there's a lease agreement. And that would tell you all the details around what like they would fix versus like what you would fix and things like that. Each agreement could be very, very different. But yeah, that's definitely an option when you're first getting out of college or something like that. I guess my biggest like push in all of this is I've just seen so many people who want to drive, you know, like a Mercedes. They can't afford to buy the Mercedes. So instead of buying it, they choose to lease it. When in reality, they might have had enough money to buy, you know, maybe like a Honda or something, which like
Mm-hmm.
I would rather do that personally, because then you own the car. That's the biggest thing with leasing versus buying is just don't try to overextend, or don't try to lease something because it's your dream car versus just being a little bit more you know, like choosing to, you know, buy the Honda. That might not be the car of your dreams, but it's definitely, to me, you know, you don't have to prove anything to anybody else. You know, there's no issue with driving a Honda. So
Mm-hmm.
that's just the biggest kind of comparison that I've seen. But definitely, leasing is a good option if you don't want to worry about that type of stuff yet either. So I do think in that situation, it's definitely a good choice.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, definitely. I agree with you too. You know, Hondas are great cars. You know, they're really nice and they're reliable, so you won't have to do with any of that. My first car was a Honda actually, so yeah, I definitely know Hondas are really reliable. And another question someone asked is if
Mhm,
does leasing affect your credit? Does it help your credit in any way? Because I know with buying and purchasing, you're building your credit history, but what
mhm.
about with leasing? Does that impact your credit at all, negatively, positively?
It will if you don't make your lease payments. Um, and it can, I mean, it will definitely help your credit as well if you do make the payments. Obviously, getting in it. So, you know, whenever I talk about building credit, it's like the first thing to help build your credit is obviously, you know, your credit card. But just having credit cards alone, like different types of credit are valued differently. So like when you're building your credit history just with credit cards, that's great as long as you're being responsible, obviously, and paying them off all the time. But like when for the next largest loan that you're going to get, a car loan or a personal loan or something like that is even looked at higher than like just a credit card, right? Because you're actually offering up collateral, which would be like this car, for example. And so that helps your credit score faster, but leasing will definitely positively contribute to your credit score as well, as long as you make those payments. As soon as you don't make a payment, then it's going to affect you like negatively. But actually taking a loan is looked at a higher source of credit than just leasing.
Thanks. Thank you. I think that's the questions for now. Again, if any questions come up, I'll let you know.
Okay, cool. Okay, so leasing versus buying again. With leasing, and again, this is what I was saying. You need to look at your contract because that's going to determine the different limitations. But with leasing, there's a limited number of miles allowed. You must pay extra if you go over that. Again, that's going to totally be determined on the lease agreement that you sign. With buying, obviously, it's your car. There's miles are unlimited. Auto insurance, leasing usually costs more due to higher levels of coverage, because keep in mind, it's not your car, right? You have to return it, so you need to make sure that you're totally covered. Buying, when you buy auto insurance, you have some different options about how much coverage you do want. So again, you'll probably have cheaper auto insurance in that situation. The cost with leasing, overall costs are less if you don't exceed the mileage or cause any damage. Buying, it could be more cost effective if you plan to keep the car long term. So again, like I've been trying to explain, leasing, it's just not as cost effective necessarily in the long term. But if it is going to be like your first car and you're not really sure what you need or what you want, I do think leasing is a very, very good option to feel a little bit more comfortable about that. Again, my biggest push, if I haven't said enough already, is just not going with the lease option to get a fancier car. It's just a little short-sighted. It might be fun, but again, you're just better off at some point from a cost perspective of buying a car at some point down the line. But hey, some people do lease forever, but it's just not a choice I've personally made, just because I think it's good to have. I don't need the most expensive car in the world. I bought what I could afford at the time and made my payments, and I think that that's definitely the most cost-effective place to go. Next slide. Okay, so what is right for you? And these are the questions you kind of want to ask yourself when buying a car. What are your transportation needs? How much do you plan on driving? How long do you plan on keeping the car? Do you have money saved for a down payment? So I think the bottom line, do you have money saved for a down payment? If no, then leasing is a really good option while you then start trying to save some money, so that once that lease is up, then you're able to maybe, buy a car or get a loan to buy your next car, if that's what you want to do. Again, how long do you plan on keeping the car? Depending on your situation, if for some reason, like, you think you only need this car for a certain period of time, maybe the job that you have requires you to travel quite a bit, that'll determine like if you really want to buy a car where you're at or if you want to lease it. Especially with the pandemic and everything like that, a lot of people are working from home right now or going to school from home, or whatever. And I actually had a couple of friends actually just even give up leasing a car, and they actually just use Uber and Lyft when they needed to, because I know that's not what this is about, really about buying a car, but it is something else to take into consideration. If you're near a train station too, like, I lived in downtown LA right before this. My need for a car really wasn't as great because I could get everywhere I need to go in downtown. So again, not everybody always needs a car either. You might be able to use Uber or Lyft or the bus or a train or something like that, or maybe leasing ends up being the right option. So, really calculating out what your actual needs are will kind of determine which way you go with leasing, buying, or, really just using public transportation. Next slide. Okay. I'll let all this, I think this is all, does it calculate out, Jarima? I'm not sure. Oh no, if you want to go back one really quickly then. Okay, so when it is time to buy, this slide is just showing you about how you want to kind of make some of these considerations, come up with a few different options of the car that you want to buy. Car 1, 2, and 3. I don't know, maybe it's your first choice is a Jeep, your second choice is a Honda, your third is, I don't know what other car, a Cadillac, I don't know, any car you want to get. And then that way you can compare the price on all of that, compare the sales tax. Obviously, there's going to be more tax on a more expensive car. License and registration fees, depending on which car it is and how old it is and different things like that, can actually affect the registration fees. And then again, too, with the miscellaneous section, it's just important to think about different costs that could be associated with it. Sure, a newer car is going to probably be more expensive, but you're also going to probably have less expectation for repairs. Additionally, older cars were not necessarily as gas efficient. And so if you buy a newer car, you might have to spend a lot less on gas. So there's all sorts of different cost benefit analysis that you kind of need to do on the different cars that you'd like to get. Like I said, with my first car, I remember my dad always used to tell me that, never, ever, ever buy a new car. That's what he had told me at the time. He goes, the minute you drive it off the lot, you lose the value of that car goes down by 25%. So I was never intending on buying a new car when I ended up buying, my first car. However, when I got to the dealership, if I bought the car, like the new car versus an older car or whatever that was on the lot, they were going to offer me this interest rate of 1% for the loan. But if I would have bought any car older than that, I'm sure the rates were something like 4%, something like that, if that's the way that I went. So in that one scenario, I did decide to buy the new car just because of how much cheaper that loan was going to be. And so again, that's why you always want to try to look at all the different options, because I wasn't even really aware that that was going to be an option until we went to the car dealership, right? They also probably want you to buy the newer, more expensive car. But it is something to compare and contrast, because sure, maybe that car is a little bit more expensive, but if the interest rate's 1% versus buying another car that's $10,000 cheaper, and that interest rate is 4%, you want to kind of go through and do some calculations and see okay, how much money am I saving? How much how much is the cost in reality, right? Because I know when I did buy that one car, after a few years, I had saved up enough money to just pay off the loan in full, which was also a really positive thing. So again, I was able to get this short-term loan, which could have gone on and on and on as I kept making payments, but finally I was able to save up enough and then pay the whole thing off. So then I didn't have a car loan anymore, or a car payment every month anymore. So definitely compare just a lot of different things. Compare the cars, compare the loans, compare lease agreements, and then, compare what the actual terms of all these loans are. One loan could look a lot more expensive, but maybe that loan's only calculates it at 5 years versus another loan that calculates it at 10. You know what I mean? And it's not a one size fits all kind of situation. I mean, it's really got to be, think about your own situation and what makes sense for you, what your earning potential is over the next few years. If all of a sudden you think you're going to have a lot more money in the next year, like you're just starting out working or something like that, take all those things into consideration. Next slide. I think this might be, yeah. Okay. So everything I kind of just said. Does anybody have any questions on anything?
Yeah, I see a couple of questions here. One of the questions was, if I get in some sort of emergency, and is it easier to get out of a loan or a lease, or can you just get out of both of them? Like, say hypothetically, you just cannot afford the payment on the lease or the loan. Is there any difference, or you could just get out of it?
So again, you're gonna want to look at the terms of your lease, but I definitely think a lease would be easier to get out of than a loan, because you with the loan that you have for the car, remember you've probably put some money down. And so you actually have, maybe you've put down $5,000 on a car loan, right, to buy. If you put down $5,000 and all of a sudden you realize oh, I can't pay this anymore or whatever, you lose that car. I mean, the other option that you could do, by the way, when you own a car though, versus leasing, is let's say you, you bought a $20,000 car, right? And you put 5 down, right? And so, you can then look at selling that car at any point in time, right? It's your car. So it's not so much that you wouldn't be able to get out of it per se, but you could sell the collateral, which would be the car. And again, if you sell it, and then when you sell it, you have to pay off that loan, right? And let's say, you're able to do that, then that's not as much of a problem, and it's not going to affect your credit or anything like that. With a lease, you'd have to go look at the terms of the lease itself, but I mean, there is a way to get out of it per se, and without affecting your credit. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, when you sign a contract, you're contractually tied to that. So I wouldn't think that's why you want to be careful before you enter into any of these things, because it's not necessarily difficult to get out of it, but at what cost to you? You know what I mean? Like what cost to your credit score, something like that.
I agree with you. And another question that someone asked is, if I'm a college student, and I want to do work for Uber or Lyft, can I
Mhm.
do that even as I'm financing a car, as I'm paying it off? Is that fine?
I'd have to go look at those things, but I've actually heard that I think you can actually do Uber and Lyft with a lease, as well as I mean, you can 100% do it with a car that you have a loan on, because keep in
Okay.
mind that's your car, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to go look. I'm not 100% sure, but as I recall, I think people were also leasing cars and doing Uber and Lyft with a lease. So I think you can do either or, but obviously you'd want to go take a look at that. But if you are buying a car, even if you got that loan out on it, that's still your car. So
Mm-hmm.
you could definitely use it for that purpose as well.
Yeah, and I even think Uber and Lyft themselves somehow, because I know a friend mentioned to me that he got a
Hmm.
car through them somehow. Like they did a deal where part of the part of the funds that he makes through driving, he basically goes to paying for this to rent the car, I guess, for the business. I'm not too sure, but
Oh,
maybe that's
yeah,
something to look
I'm
into.
not as familiar with what Uber and Lyft actually do, in terms of the car, but I know that like there's no issue at all. If you buy the car, you can use it for whatever
Mm-hmm.
you like. And I think I have heard things about people leasing cars, and using it that way as well.
Okay, makes sense. And someone asked for the sheet that you showed where you showed three different cars. Is there any way they can get that? Maybe we can email it to them after or get a copy of
Yeah,
that
well,
sheet.
I can take a picture of it
Okay.
and I can get it over to Dreama, and then just that one.
Okay.
I mean, she has the whole slide, I mean, the whole
Oh,
presentation
true,
too, if
true.
anybody wants to take a look at that again.
I like it because it breaks down all the costs. Because a lot of people just think, oh, it's 20,000, that's it. But there's so much more that
Yeah.
goes into it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, honestly, like that's the most nerve-wracking thing about all these types of things. Like when you're purchasing,
Mhm.
again, leasing might be a better option for a lot of the people that are, students right now, or maybe
Mhm.
just graduating from college, because it kind of gets you familiar with like, okay, how much gas does it cost to get places? So you can kind of lease first and get an understanding of like what your needs are, how much you drive, things like that, before taking on car ownership. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because you buy a car that you think you can afford, and with all the right motivations, and then something outside of your control happens. You bust a tire, you get in an accident, I mean,
Mhm.
and then you're in the whole new world of pain in that situation, because it is your responsibility. But
Yeah.
I think long term, buying is definitely the more responsible option, but you just need to be in the right place in your life to be able to do that as well.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah. I get you. And someone asked, is it should I consider when I buy a car to add those warranties, those extended warranties that they offer, or to just stick with the factory warranty? And that should just be fine. In your experience of buying cars.
um I'm trying to think. So I mean, so in my experience of buying cars, I think I've only bought one car from the dealership. And I think I bought the other cars that I had bought historically were at like when I was in high school, like there was a like an auto, like a community auto show or something like that, where people were all
Oh, okay,
coming
okay,
and
okay.
selling their cars. Then you don't have any warranties, but that's why you get insurance. And I just
Yeah.
really think like you make sure you just read all this fine print
Mhm.
when you're getting it, and what those warranties include, because that's why you also have insurance, honestly. So sometimes these extended warranties are a little bit silly. I mean, that's the reason you have insurance. And when
Mhm.
you're buying insurance too, you might want to talk to an insurance company before you buy that car,
Yeah.
and find out how much insurance does cost, and what the difference would be on different types of cars. I've never personally driven a sports car. It's just not, like I said, but I'm extremely frugal too about this kind of
Mhm.
stuff. I've never seen it be super important to have like the flashiest car in the entire world, because to me, it was more important for me to buy a home at some point. And I said,
Mhm.
okay, well, look, I don't get to drive this Mercedes that maybe somebody else is driving, but I'm going to keep saving money over time, to then make that home purchase or something like
Mhm.
that. So I've always thought more long term. So my advice is always coming from that perspective. But I do think the warranties are sometimes a bit silly, because like if you've got insurance on your car, that should be able to cover it as well.
Mm-hmm.
But look and compare everything. Just make sure you read everything that they're giving you.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wish there was always such a straight like yes and no
Yeah. Yeah.
answer, but sometimes it's just more about informing yourself as much as possible
Mm-hmm.
and then making the best decision for yourself. Like when somebody says, is it better lease or buy? I mean, it just depends, like
Mm-hmm.
because of the presentation that I've shown you guys today, there's not a one size fits all sort of answer for any of this, but just know what your options are and really explore those.
Yeah. Like it basically seems like it just depends on the person's situation
Mm-hmm.
financially, where they are in life, what their goals are financially. So it definitely
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense there. And someone says, uh, well, another thing someone asked is like, if I'm gonna buy an electric vehicle, I'm gonna be saving a lot on gas. Should I consider buying a more expensive car now since I'm gonna be saving? For example, if they're gonna, well, I think what they're trying to ask is if they're
Yeah.
gonna buy like a $20,000 car and it comes out to like $300 a month. Let's just say, if they're gonna be saving $200 a month. Since they're not gonna be spending on gas, should they now technically they can afford a $500 payment, or what would you say is like the best approach for that?
Well, okay, so one of the things I guess to take into consideration is, again, how much are you going to be driving? Are you
Yeah.
driving a
Mhm.
ton? Are you really going to be saving that much more on gas?
Mhm.
And I always go look at it as like, um, I never have ever gone into any kind of purchase, whether it's been my car or the home that I just recently purchased,
Mhm.
with can I afford more? I've always gone into it thinking like, how much do I technically like really need to have? You know what I mean? Like, could I afford a $50,000 car? Maybe, but do I really even need that?
Mhm.
No, then go with the lower option. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Never ever go into any of these things thinking like, oh, if I do this, now I can spend more. I always am approaching everything with like, how can I spend
Yeah.
less?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, electric cars are great, and if you think you're going to be just driving a ton, like
Mhm.
if you are going to maybe do a job as like Uber or Lyft to like get more money, maybe you do spend a little bit more money in order to get that electric car because you know you're going to be driving
Yeah.
constantly. But in my mind, that might be the only scenario where I would consider buying a little bit more expensive car. The
Mhm.
other reason you might buy a little bit more expensive car is, again, older cars come with more issues and chances for
Mhm.
repairs, things like that. So, you also don't want to buy like the cheapest car in the entire world. You've got to kind of find some balance
Yeah.
with what your needs are and what your wants are.
Mhm. And is there any like last minute tips or anything you want to leave our audience with, maybe from your personal experience? Definitely, I like what you said about never buy new, because you end up losing like you said like 25%. Because I'm in
I
it,
don't know. Yeah, my
something
dad
like that. Yeah, your
definitely.
dad said that. It's true because for me, I bought a used car, and right now I'm selling it, and I'm actually selling it for profit, like six or $7,000 more than what I paid. So that
Mhm.
would have only happened with buying used. Not to say buying new is bad either. There are certain situations, like you said, where you got that 1% interest rate. So that definitely was really good. Stuck with me. But is there anything else that you would like to add or?
I really just think doing a lot of research. I mean, you can go to a dealership, like go to the car, like go to several different dealerships. Like
Mm-hmm.
so, when I finally bought like my first car myself or whatever, I did so much research on so many different cars. Historically, I had only driven Jeeps, like used Jeeps. Like I learned how to drive stick shift on a on a
Oh, that's
Jeep
cool.
Wrangler.
That's cool.
And so when I was buying my new car, it was like hard for me to like, okay, Jeeps are expensive as new cars. I didn't want to, I knew I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't go in to a Jeep dealership and afford like a new car. And so I actually ended up getting a Subaru, which this is the same car I still have today. I've never bought another car after that. And I didn't expect to go and get a new car. I planned on getting a used Subaru at that dealership. But it wasn't until I heard about the 1% loan on
Mm-hmm.
this. And again, I had to calculate it all out for myself. How much could I put down? What would that mean in terms of payments for me? I think the big positive is that when you buy a new car, it does come with warranties, so you don't have to purchase an extra warranty.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I really think for your first car, buying used is the best decision in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
With that Jeep that I did buy used, I also I broke even with it
Mm.
when I sold it back to like the was it CarMax or something like that?
It's awesome.
CarMax. CarMax is a really good place to go and buy a car also. I think they're
Mm-hmm.
very, very, very fair,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a lot of different options. I would just really compare.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the reason I ended up getting the Subaru, honestly, was I started looking at, I started looking at how much cars lost in value
Oh,
over
appreciation.
time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it just turned out, and it's not for everybody, believe me. I never planned on getting a Subaru, but Subarus lost less value over time than any other car. And that also affected my decision in getting
Mm-hmm.
that. So it's like to buy a new Subaru for like, I don't know what if it was like $30,000 back
Mm-hmm.
then or something like that, versus buying one that was a few years old. You didn't see the price go down
Yeah,
dramatically. So that also
that's true.
informed my decision.
Yeah, because like you were saying, like the cars like the Mercedes or BMWs, they'll drop heavy in the first couple of years. So I've seen them when I'm
Yeah,
researching cars. There,
I know.
there's a
I mean,
lot.
this is just a piece of my own advice,
Yeah,
but I've always just looked at it as like, I don't have anything to prove to anybody, so I don't care what kind of car I drive as long as it
yeah.
gets me from point A to point B.
Mm-hmm.
People, there will often be this saying of like being car rich and house poor, meaning, you're
Yeah,
driving like $100,000 BMW or something, and still renting. I think the goal is to
exactly.
get to like, live within your means the whole time so that you can achieve those larger goals that you're going to have in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can tell you right now, if I would have bought a BMW, I wouldn't own a home now
Something,
because you need that money for any down payment.
something someone once told me. BMW stands for break my wallet. So
Yeah.
it's a great car, but you have to consider it like your expenses and everything. And like you said, if you just focus on living within your means, it's definitely gonna help you in the long term. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Cars are
thank you.
important. I mean, cars are exciting, especially for, anybody just getting out of high school or
Mm-hmm.
college. I don't know how old everybody is in the Facebook group or
It
whatever.
varies. It varies.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's exciting, but don't let your excitement allow you to make a bad decision.
Mm-hmm.
It can all be exciting, but at the end of the day, it really is just a car. And in my mind, a car should facilitate your needs, and your purpose is to get to work, to get to the next place you've got to go. It's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily to like impress anybody else at the end of the
Yeah.
day. I mean, maybe other people might feel differently, but if we're being realistic here, just keep that in mind when you're looking at these cars. Don't always think like, how much could I afford?
Yeah.
Saying, how much do I need to spend is a
Yeah.
real key thing.
And car payments get they're not as exciting. After making that
No,
first payment, you're like, oh man. So yeah, they get boring after
exactly.
the first payment.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, especially for the college kids too. It's like now all of a sudden, you have a car payment. Now you have an
Insurance.
apartment you're leasing. Like these are all more and more bills.
Yeah.
And what's more important, having some real flashy car or having some more square feet in the apartment that you're leasing? You know what I mean? It all
Exactly.
affects one another. There's only so much money in everybody's
Yeah.
paychecks.
Exactly. Exactly. Have a balance between your needs and wants. So
Mm-hmm.
important. Well, Jackie, thank you so much for teaching us to our workshop. Auto buying. I think a lot of us here watching probably learned a lot, and they're gonna make a way better decision now that they're gonna buy, whether it's gonna be used, whether it's gonna be
Okay.
new, purchasing, leasing. Maybe they're not even gonna buy a car anymore. They're gonna be like, oh, let me think about it. Maybe let me get a little moped or a motorcycle instead.
Yeah.
Save some gas and save a couple of bucks every single month. But it was fun. It was interesting to hear your experiences. So I'll look into the Subarus. Let's see. That's interesting. You said it's the best car that doesn't depreciate as much, right?
Resale value.
Okay, resale value. That's good. I always if you can break even when you sell it after buying it, that's awesome. That's like if you
You've
drove it
won.
almost
You
for
haven't
free.
broke even at that point.
Yeah, it's like you almost drove it for free. Because I mean,
Exactly.
gas and
Yeah.
insurance, you pay that for every car. So that's interesting. I'll look into it since I'm gonna sell my car soon. So I'll look into that. But besides that, everyone that's watching, if you learned something new, if you have any questions, comment down below. Let us know. Send us an email. We'll send out that sheet. Just comment down your email and we'll be able to send that over to you. If you learned anything new, if you're gonna buy a car, tag us. Maybe we can share that with Jack and say, hey, she learned, he or she, whoever it was that watched the workshop, and hey, I learned so much. I went and bought a car, got a 1% interest rate, and now I'm living my life, driving down PCH and having a good time. So Thank you again, Jackie, and thank you for everyone that joined us today. And we'll see you guys in the next workshop. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Josh.
You're welcome. Bye bye.